I'll give him this. His financial system is a work of genius. I couldn't undo it if I tried. And I tried.
Who lives, who dies, who tells your story?
President Madison. He took our country from bankruptcy to prosperity. I hate to admit it, but he doesn't get enough credit for all the credit he gave us.
Who lives, who dies, who tells your story?
Hopefully there's a couple Hamilton fans in the room. Who lives, who dies, who tells your story? The lyrics work like this. Let me tell you what I wish I'd known when I was young and dreamed of glory. We have no control over who lives, who dies, who tells our story, but history has its eyes on you. And when my time is up, I'll ask the question, have I done enough? That's a heavy thought, isn't it? Like when my time is up, and maybe it's the whole overarching piece of this conversation today around story, around the second question in Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets, a journey into 5 questions that can help us live a story worth living. And I believe that's a story that connects us with God through Jesus Christ and invites us into his purposes for our lives. But the story's in process. All of you come in this morning and your story is like full in process, decision by decision, stacked on itself. And I want to just go to a few historical figures to think about, like, the stakes are high, but the storytelling's really complicated. A lot of us know who this is, Mother Teresa. She started over 500 care centers in over 100 countries around the world, institutions establishing higher education for women throughout India were started through her efforts. There's even an airport in Albania named after her. She won the Nobel Peace Prize, and she turned and reinvested the $200,000 earnings back into the poorest of the poor in the neighborhoods where she served. That's maybe a story we might know about Mother Teresa, but it's not always the story everybody wants to tell. And there was a documentary made by Christopher Hitchens called Hell's Angel about Mother Teresa. Christopher Hitchens was a notable atheist, and this is what he said about her, and actually won a lot of applause for making this statement. Won some awards and was highly reviewed by critics in his documentary. He said Mother Teresa is less interested in helping the poor than using them as an indefatigable, I had to look that word up, it means like inexhaustible, indefatigable source of wretchedness to fuel the true motivation behind her fundamentalist Roman Catholic beliefs. He's trying to tell her story. Now imagine, if someone wrote something like that about you, what would you do? What would you, imagine if that day she decided, I'm hanging it up, that this is not the story I'm telling. Listen to how people are talking about me. And right there we would have, or maybe she never starts. Because critique comes all throughout your story, all throughout your hopes, all throughout your dreams. And maybe she never starts and we don't see 500 centers to care for the least of these around the world. Mother Teresa, interesting story to think about. We have no control who lives, who dies, who tells our story. Some of you know this guy, not personally, 16th President of the United States. His legacy is complicated, but his legacy was really the beginning of emancipation and the beginning of personhood for a people made in the image of God, but used as a tool for economic gain in the cruel sin of slavery. He said words like this: "It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of their devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain." And then listen to his words: "That this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth." And he was fighting for all people to have the rights of people. But leading up to his inauguration, listen to what was said about him. "The illustrious Honest Abe has continued during the last week to make a fool of himself and to mortify and shame the intelligent people of this great nation. He's no more capable of becoming a statesman or even a moderate one than the braying of a donkey can become a noble lion. And people now marvel how it has come to pass that Mr. Lincoln should have been selected as the representative man of any political party. His weak, wishy-washy, namby-pamby efforts, imbecile in matter, disgusting in manner, have made us the laughingstock of the whole world. That was from the local paper in Salem where Lincoln spent a good part of his life, people who knew him. Think about had he sat on his inauguration and heard those words, other people telling his story, how that might have impacted him. We have no control over who lives, who dies, and who tells our story, but history has its eyes on us. And so today we jump into the reality that, look, so aside from our stories, we all love a good story. And we love a good story. Maybe it's a book, a movie. Maybe it's a series or comedy, special, fiction, nonfiction. Maybe it's a personal story, a story a friend tells. For years, there's a story my friends and I love to tell. We were at Arco Arena watching Jason Kidd play in high school, a basketball player, watching him play. And I was in the bathroom. A little detail here, don't draw conclusions. I was in the stall, but the stall had like a half-inch gap in it. And then I saw a guy walk in dressed just like me, and he went to the urinal. And then I saw my friend walk in and think he sees me at the urinal. And he quietly walks up behind the guy. And then he grabs both shoulders and shakes him and goes, "Hey!" I'm dying in the urinal right now. This is all happening in the bathroom. The guy was in mid-business. This whole thing was a mess. We love that story. Betsy loves that story too. We love that story. We would tell that story all the time because storytelling, it's part of how we make meaning and we have life, and it's part of how we do things. So I want to get you to think about a question. Sorry, I talked about that a couple times. What's one of your favorite stories? Just turn real quick. If you're new with us today or you're visiting or you're coming back, we do a few questions on a morning. You can sit quietly. You can make a friend and meet someone new. Or if you have your message notes and you'd like just to jot it down in there, you can. But what's one of your favorite stories? Personal, movies, books, to tell, overheard, at a party. And we'll be back in just a minute. So go ahead and turn and answer this question.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo in so much space. And when you're out there without care, yeah, I was out of touch. But it wasn't because I didn't know enough. I just knew too much. Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Possibly.
Oh, clearly there's some favorite stories out there. Maybe it's a favorite movie, maybe it's a concert you went to. Maybe for some of you, like for me, it's the moment where I realized where I had believed and I'd come to grips with the reality that I believed the tomb was empty and Jesus rose from the dead, and all of a sudden I became a follower of Jesus. This happened in 1994 in the spring in south of London, and that moment, that story, why not full of incredible details, is full of the most incredible detail that began to transform and change my life. And it's not as apparent as it should be, but each of us, and it's why today's question in Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets is so important. Each of us are telling a story. Now, here's the default. Someday we die. And if we are given the opportunity, we think, did I live the life I wanted to live? Did I tell the story I want to tell? But the default's a broken system. You have no more time, energy, opportunity. You have nothing left to tell the story. It's done. And so with that in mind, I hope today to just have us all in a conversation that leaves us going, my story's being built one moment today, being here. It's a building block you've put into your story. And often we think no, this is just the current events. This is what's happening today. But actually those become our story. I think it works a little bit like this. Significant moments, current events, seasons of life of today. Well, tomorrow, they're the story we tell, whatever part of them we grab hold of or however we use them. And often the determining factor, whether or not we want to even tell our story, is based on the decisions that we make in the current, the things we do, the things that unfold, because we write the story of our lives one decision at a time. And I need to review for you. We're in the third week of this series. I want to make sure we're on the right foundation of kind of what we're talking through. And the first is this, is if we could come up with 5 good questions that could create good decisions, then we can live a story worth telling. And a story worth telling is a story that's going to impact others' lives and it's going to lift up and cause others to flourish. It's uplift is a story worth telling. I mean, it's just volunteering. People volunteer all the time, but it's coming together to say we love our city and we love each other and new relationships were formed and good was done. But you had to say, am I going to register? You started to think, you had to ask yourself questions, and what am I doing? And what's my schedule like? And then you had an event and you started to build a story. You started to build a story, and our process looks like this. Ask a good question, answer honestly, and act wisely. I could say this is a biblical framework for decision making, because good questions are going to align us with a God who loves us in the scriptures and bring us to that place where we're like, okay, so how do I ask a good question? Not all questions are good questions. And then I need to answer honestly. I can't just answer. I need to answer honestly. And then I've got to choose to act on my answer. This is so important because we're not the only people impacted by our decisions. And we're not the only people impacted by our regrets. So there's a theme verse for this whole series leading us up into the summer. And it's this right here, I think. We'll hang there for a second, see what I can do. Okay. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. And we've said, hey, it's like not that it's a tweet-sized character. Like, memorize it. Put it in your mind, whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, because it's true. The prudent see danger and they take refuge. They see it and they stop. They stop by asking themselves good questions. The simple keep going and pay the penalty. Anyone try to memorize it? Giving it a shot? Thank you, Jesse. Very good. A+ for you. A+ for everybody. This is a wonderful environment. But yeah, like take this, put this in your mind. Put it on your steering wheel. Don't look at it while you're driving. We can just decide that's a bad decision. Put it on your mirror. Put it on your lock screen. Put it in your life and start to internalize, if I want to tell a good story, I need to become prudent. Because the stories we tell about keeping going and paying the penalty are often stories we tell with regret. They're stories we tell with a broken heart. They're stories we tell that we wish we could rewire. Now, there is an idea that I think it's true. It's been true in my life. Like my bad decisions can sometimes be the catalyst for the life change I need. Absolutely. But that's not my strategy. My strategy is not like, I'm going to just keep messing up till I figure out who I'm supposed to be. So I want to have some good questions that we can talk through here. And question number 1 was the integrity question. Am I being honest with myself? Really? So if you missed 2 weeks ago, the week before Mother's Day, that was the question. Question number 2, today's question is the legacy question. The legacy question is all about story. What story do I want to tell? In the season of life you're in and the decision you have to make in the business transition or the college choices or the home purchasing or renting or all the different decisions, the things we do. Do I want to be a hero? Do I want to be a villain? Do I want to set an example? Do I want to be an example? Do I want to be a bad example? What option will make this story worth remembering? And the legacy question helps us kind of wrestle with that. Imagine big decisions you've had to make. The decisions maybe you have to make right now. If you stopped and you said, what story do I want to tell? That's it. You just ask yourself that question. Maybe sit on your back porch or grab a piece of paper and a cup of coffee or sit down with someone who will speak truth to you and just say, this is the decision I need to make. What story do I want to tell? Now here's the power in this thing. You get to decide. But it's one decision at a time. You don't decide what the story is going to be and just show up one day. You get to decide, and it's one decision at a time. So I want to bring you in a little bit into like maybe emotionally where we're going with this question. So think about a current decision you need to make or one you recently made. What story do you want to tell, or what story did it tell? We all have a decision we made recently, or we all have a decision we need to make. So take a minute, chat about that, and we'll come back and we're going to explore the life of somebody who continually asked this question through Genesis. All right, jump in.
wanna feel some kind of change. Even the smallest spark. Something to keep me sane. Won't you whisper your love to me one more time? Oh, Lord, let me know that this road is still right. Won't you tell me a tale, or just give me a sign that I will be alright, that I will be alright.
So I hope that's a question you'll pick up over lunch later or throughout the day, whatever you're up to, that you'll turn and go, hey, I want to keep having that conversation. I made a key decision during that question. I turned the air conditioning on, so it was like 75 degrees in here. You might be comfortable, but you should know in the summer, bring a jacket normally, because we like to cool this place down a little bit. This question is just thinking this way can be so helpful for you and I, because we write the story of our lives one decision at a time. One decision at a time. Every decision we make becomes a permanent part of our story. Just a little bit at a time, brick upon brick. They stack up, and you think about like all the things we might be confronted with in our stories, in work, in our marriage, in our singleness, with our kids, in our own private and personal spaces, with our finances, with how we spend our time, what we watch, don't watch, what we take in, how we talk about people, who we mock and don't mock. We shouldn't be mocking anybody, by the way. That wasn't really like an option. But these things all find their ways in. And it's interesting because maybe this is where lying trickles into the human experience. Like, just as our story is built on decisions, it can also be built on a lot of half-truths, myths, mistruths, lies, things we add on. It starts kind of young. I remember once, I think I've shared this with you, I was like driving home. I was probably 5 miles from home, and that was going to take 10 or 15 minutes, but I was on Farm Hill Boulevard, which feels like I'm almost home. And Emily's like, hey, when are you going to be home? I'm like, I'm almost there. I'm on Farm Hill Boulevard. But I was like at the very beginning of Farm Hill Boulevard. That's a small enough, but then I realized, she's like, when I got home 15 minutes later, she's like, where'd you go? And I thought, why didn't I just, like, I intentionally told her I was on Farm Hill Boulevard so she would think I was just about to come home. And I had to think about even little things like that stacked upon themselves become the story we tell. And sometimes we get trapped in a lighthearted way. I had a buddy named Rod. Rod, if you're watching, I love you. I doubt he is, but I love you. Rod, one summer, came back from summer in middle school and told, right when Back to the Future was big, he came back and he said, you won't believe what happened. This summer, I was in the parking lot of the market, and Michael J. Fox and his DeLorean drove through, and I was on a skateboard, and he hit me, and I went right through his window. He deadpans this story to us. I lived in a town with like 700 people. Okay, it's not like we're in a big city and Michael J. Fox is driving his DeLorean through. I don't even think he had one. And we're like, Rod, how are you not hurt? He said, well, I was wearing football pads. So here's his story. Football pads, midsummer, little town. Michael J. Fox hit and runs him. Somehow he gets in the DeLorean and gets back out so Michael J. Fox can get away. He stuck to that story forever until about our senior year. I feel like he's like, guys, I got to be honest with you. Michael J. Fox never ran into me, never seen him. And we're like, we need to be honest with you. We know. But we start somewhere in our lives, we just start telling much more serious stories and building blocks and making decisions without thinking through the reality that today's decisions are the building blocks for tomorrow's story. So I want to ask you, what story do you want to tell? And it's important that we understand when it comes to the legacy question. So the legacy question, right? What story do you want to tell? It moves us from the urgency of present options to the power of future story. And you know what present options are like. They're emotional, they're loaded, they're full of energy, and it feels like imagine, those of you who are married, imagine if this is how you were proposed to. Marry me now. Like, it doesn't work. You can't put all that emotion, but we do that with our decision making. We're like, I've got to make a decision now. And I'm like, well, no, you don't. Time out. You can actually stop and you can say, why am I doing this really? And what story do I want to tell? It took me 10 seconds to say those two questions, to get them in our mind, to get thinking about them. And so I want to show you a man from the book of Genesis. His name is Joseph. If you've been around the church, many of you are very familiar with Joseph's story, but Joseph is a model of this legacy question. What story do I want to tell? He confronts high emotion situations, and instead of reacting, he hits pause. And he says, no, I'm going to tell the story I want to tell with my life. And maybe as you listen to his story, you'll consider your own. It's such a great reminder that you and I, like he's like us. His story is much more difficult than most of ours, but he's like us. He's got a heartbeat and his brain works the way ours does, and the same God loves him and is calling him and called him, and he shows up in the story in the book of Genesis. And so I'm going to take you through the wave of his life. But around 1800 BC, he's 17 years old, and he's one of 12. He's the 11th of 12 sons, and he finds himself in a situation that he can't win. So basically, his brothers, so think sibling rivalry, right? All of his brothers are having an issue with him because his father Jacob loved him the most. He was the favorite. He was the favorite. He also had a few dreams that he's like, yeah, I'm the favorite. And so between all of this, the brothers were getting a little tense. So they did what tense family members do when they're wrestling with jealousy. They said, let's kill our brother. But there was a little more reason. They slowed down a little bit and they said, no, we can't kill our brother. That would break our father's heart. Instead, let's sell him into slavery. And that's just what they did. It was a bit more merciful and much more profitable. So they sold him into slavery. This is the story unfolding. When Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance as he approached, and they made plans to kill him. Listen to how they talked about him. Here comes the dreamer, they said. Come on, let's kill him and throw him in one of these cisterns. We can tell our father a wild animal has eaten him, and then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. This story is so thick with like aggression and frustration and jealousy. And this is how he's a teenager. He's your age, guys. And this is how his story starts out. His brothers are like, let's kill him. No, that's mean. Let's sell him into slavery, right? And then it unfolds. So they sell Joseph into slavery. They tell his dad he's killed by wild animals. So they start building this lie. They start kind of trying to craft a story about their lives. And now they're forced to live with this the rest of their lives. But this is what Joseph does. He ends up on an auction block in Egypt, and he's purchased. He's purchased by a leader named Potiphar to be a house servant for him. But Joseph makes a decision, and hear this. Go back and read this story over and over and over. It's full of so many important things for life. He makes a decision to say, look, do I run? Do I fight? Do I crawl? Do I lay down and die? Do I do what this system of slavery is forcing me onto? Do I live in just self-pity because my brothers have betrayed me and my legacy's gone and my story's over? That's the situation he's in. And it's an interesting dilemma because he's kind of a rich kid who grew up as his father's favorite son. And now he's a slave, an unknown, in a guy named Potiphar's house. And what's so relatable about his story is that none of it is his fault. And for a lot of us, when we look at our stories, we're like, well, I wish I had a better story. But you don't know her or him or my dad or the home I grew up in or what happened to me in college. But so just slow down and look at Joseph as we look at his story unfold. He doesn't let someone else take control of his story. He doesn't let someone else hijack it. Instead, he decides to throw himself all the way into serving his new master, Potiphar. And he serves him well. And eventually Potiphar notices him and he gives him responsibility, makes him like the head over all of his house. And so now we have Joseph going, look, I was kidnapped once. He's been sold 2 times into slavery, but I'm a victim who decided to not be a victim. This is what he decides. And then his story takes a shift and something new comes his way. Potiphar's wife comes to him one day when Potiphar's out and says, Joseph, come to my bed. And he avoids her and ignores her, and it kind of quietly goes away. But then the story builds. She comes back when everyone's gone, and she says, Joseph, come to my bed. And his story intersects now with someone else's story, which is the truth for you and me. Our stories always intersect, and sometimes we feel like we're in a no-win situation. That's where Joseph is. His boss's wife is demanding something from him, a slave. She insists that he become her lover. And he has two options. So let's just go to his story. We're going to look what unfolds. He has two options, okay? And neither leads to a good outcome. He can do what she says and pay the price with Potiphar, or he can turn and run and pay the price with her. There's no third way for Joseph. So once again, like he did with slavery, like he did in Potiphar's house, like he did with his brothers, he opts for a better story. He builds the building blocks. He just puts them on, and watch what Joseph does. He prefers a story full of integrity, full of honor, full of respect, no matter what it costs him. And he says to her, he says, hey, I showed up as a slave. I didn't have any rights. I didn't have any future. I was purchased for your household by your husband, and all I have done is try to serve him the best of my ability. And through hard work and God's help, I've gained the trust of your husband, and he's put me in charge. And what I love about this, I want to encourage you, when you're wrestling with a decision, rehearse or say the story you want to be true out loud. Speak it out loud, like right there, he puts it on the table. This is my story, then watch what unfolds next. He says, with me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to me. He's entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. Now you'd think, honorable, noble. She's probably like, Joseph, you're right. I'm super sorry. Here's a raise and your freedom. Instead, he runs, she grabs his cloak. Trying to get away from the situation. She grabs his cloak and she says, this servant of yours tried to assault me, and here's my evidence. And he is thrown in prison. He's thrown in prison even though these were his last words. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? He is steadfast on the building blocks of his story. Yet, he finds himself one more time, this time accused of trying to assault his owner's wife in their house, and he's on the run. He ends up being thrown in prison. But his story's not over, because when he's in prison, he does what he's always done now. He goes, hey, another story intersected with mine. Who do I want to be in prison? And he ends up being like promoted in prison, and kind of having some leadership and some voice in prison because of how he conducts himself. And then that leads to a moment when the king or the Pharaoh is having these troublesome dreams. Now, Joseph's 17 years old. He started in slavery. 2 years he's been in prison now. This whole thing is unfolding. This isn't like 1 week of a bad week in Joseph's life. This whole thing is unfolding. And he goes to the king and he says, I can tell you what your dream is. So prisoner now goes before the king, inserts his voice, and says, look, we're going to be living high for 7 years. Our grain is going to be awesome. Grain was a big deal. Our grain is going to be awesome, but then there's going to be 7 years where there's like no grain. So king, I think we ought to save up and be ready. And the king, the Pharaoh, was struck, and look what he says to Joseph. Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? And then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there's no one so discerning and wise as you. Now imagine if that's the story Joseph wanted. Well, let's look what happens. You shall be in charge of my palace. He becomes number 2 in all of Egypt. And all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. You don't wake up one day and say, this is the story I want. I'm just going to live my life and someday be here. You will blame everybody, be frustrated, be full of anger and disappointment. Joseph didn't try to get here. He just tried to live with honor and purpose and do what was right and make a decision that would build a story worth telling over and over and over. Now, I think many of you are familiar with what happens next. Joseph becomes second in command. The grain happens, the famine happens, and then one day this tribe of people come wandering into Egypt, hungry and on the verge of starvation, and they're begging for a handout, and they're brought before the number 2 in command of Egypt. And Joseph looks down and he sees his brothers. And instead of being full of rage and revenge and vengeance, he offers them respite and care and food. And Joseph's story is like, really get into Genesis and read through this. His story is amazing because here's, like, maybe the point of the story is that Joseph wasn't anything like his brothers. Because throughout his entire life, he refused to just emotionally and pressure-driven react to what was going on in his life. And in refusing to react, he avoided becoming like the people that he didn't want to be like. So his story in a nutshell is favorite son, sold into slavery, bought ahead of Potiphar's house, thrown into jail, prison manager, not quite as high, prison manager, ongoing imprisonment, second in command of Egypt, and caring for his people, the people of Israel, future Israel, caring for them. That's Joseph's story. He decided to live a story worth telling, and it makes me want to ask you, what story do you want to tell? So today's real simple. That's the question. I'd love for you to go read Joseph's story. I'd love for you to spend some time and look at all the nuance, and it's a great story. It's one worth knowing and one worth telling, and then start to apply against your own life. What story do I want to tell? What story do I want to tell? Am I willing to hit a red light instead of a green light when my emotion and the intensity and the pressure is up? And Joseph was telling us something that Jesus tried to bring home and make really clear. He told a story about some soils, and Jesus said this to them: don't you understand this parable? Because people were having a hard time understanding what Jesus was trying to reveal to them, because it was so contrary to anything they had ever heard. He said, how then will you understand any parable? The farmer sows the word, and some people are like seed along the path. And he goes into many stories, many different soils. Seed along the path, seed that's shallow, seed that's rocky, and seed that falls in good soil. But when I read this parable and I think about Joseph's life, I realize this is a parable about the legacy question. The word of God is coming to it, that Jesus is inviting us to live with him, to walk with him, to find our identity and our purpose in him. But he's saying, but you've got to ask the question, what story do you want to tell? Do you want to live free and redeemed, let go of control, take your burdens and put them on Jesus? Do you want to live a life with purpose and value for other people in all things, regardless of what it costs you? Are you willing to lay your life down for not only your friend, but your enemy? Jesus is inviting us to say, see, we are like people. This is us. People are like the seed that fell on the shallow soil. No one really knows exactly what the soils are, but I've always thought that we have some choice in the soil. That we have a chance to go, the seed, the word of God is here, and I'm gonna slow my roll and I'm gonna do some work with it. I'm not gonna just run past it. So that's our invitation. And here's your closing question. Is there a chapter of your story that you regret or wish you could write over? Or maybe you think it will never take place and you're just filled with sadness? Spend a moment and pray about that. We'll put a little music on, and then we'll end our time with a few words here.
So there's nothing I can do to let you down. It doesn't take a trophy to make you proud. I'll never be more loved than I am right now. Going through a storm, but I won't go down. I hear your voice carried in the rhythm of the wind to call me out. If you would cross an ocean.
I think it's a truth we don't want you to leave without grabbing hold of, is that you're not your regrets or your failures or the decisions you didn't stack up rightly. There's a way we can live intentionally, but you'll never be more loved than you are right now. I'd love to pray for us, and then we're going to have a quick fireside chat. Hence, the shades came down. Some of you are like, did they lock the doors? What's happening? So, all right. Well, Father, I just pray that everyone would leave today knowing that they have a choice, but that they are loved. Your love does not hang on our choices. Help us tell a great story. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. So it's May. We're doing something a little, turn up we got a fire crackle here. Little fireside chat. We're going to do this week and next week. It's a little longer today, but I'm going to really fly through this, and I'll spend a little more time on it next week. But I just want to let our Eastwind family and guests know like what's coming and what we're excited about. So there's a few things that our leadership has settled on, and so we want to pour our generosity, our time, our energy, our talents into the next generation. I mean, we would say, how important is the faith of the generation? Just say below you. Just the generation coming up after you, what's it worth? And we would say everything, everything. We don't want to give, I see some of our next generation coming, and there's a generation even below you guys. They're in the nursery right now. So a few things I want to highlight that have happened in the life of the church and hopefully encourages you and inspires you. But one is we added an additional youth pastor to our Eastwind team. Katie Langley was singing today. Katie's on the team now, and we've increased the resources we're pouring into our student ministry. It's going to be our big focus this year. The second thing, which is really big in the life of Eastwind, is in June, we're paying off the remainder of our mortgage. So that's good news. Now, if you're to ask me, why is that a big deal? It's not so we can be like mortgage free. It's for our future. It's what comes next. So you probably don't know right now, like our kids' spaces are packed. And you might even feel a little tight in here. So we're trying to wrestle with how we're prepared for Southeast Boys and the opportunity to share the hope of Christ with people here. So we've established a futures team, or we're establishing a futures team. Brett Robinson, sitting right up here, is on our board. He's going to be leading that up and just starting to look at, sometimes what happens with churches is you're never ready for the parking lot to be too crowded. And then you pull in and you're like, this church wasn't even ready for the parking lot to be too crowded, and you leave. So Brett's going to be looking at our spaces and how we can maximize that, and inviting some lay leaders to join him in that journey. And we're in the fall, through the summer and the fall, on the cheap, I don't mean we want it to look cheap, but we're going to expand our kid mission spaces with a camp-like kid mission